This is Small Talk with 101 ESPN's Michelle Smallman.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into episode 137 of Small Talk. Your host, Steve Cerruti and Michelle Smallman are here with you. What's up to our podcast audience? And hello, as always, to our YouTube audience. And Cerruti with the backwards hat and the hoodie, fresh off a week in Burlington, Vermont. How was it up there?
This is a Burlington sweatshirt too.
Oh.
What's up? I'm such a loser. No, but I love the sweatshirt. It's awesome.
I was going to say, can you lean back a little? I need to see that more.
It's so
very
awesome.
Cool.
It's
very
super cool.
Is it Patagonia?
It's that's kind of the vibe of it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Looks
and it's like a light hood. It's for people who are listening. You're like, what the hell's going on? It's like a light hoodie. It's very nice. I don't know. I like to get things when I go somewhere. I got a hat too. We got some stuff. So I'm a big swag guy when I go places. I just like to remember stuff through clothes or hats or whatever. So I ended up picking up a sweatshirt. But Burlington, yeah, we were there. I think we were there for 4 or 5 days. Long weekend. I didn't really take any time off. I actually just worked from there because I could work remotely. We had a couple of days off. It's awesome. It's awesome. I kind of described it. It's a little bit like an earthier, crunchier, smaller New England version of Madison because it's a college town, right? And
yeah, you said crunchier. I was going to say they have good beer there, but without the binge drinking of beer and the cheese curds.
Yeah, they're more in touch with nature, and they're it's very much like a hiking community, and I'm sure there's a lot of natural deodorant going on there as well. But I had it was cold, so it didn't matter. Nobody smelled. It was fine.
With that natural deodorant, I'm gonna guess a lot of patchouli.
Yes, and I think
Which
it's weird that I like those places. You wouldn't think of me as like liking these type of places, but I felt at home there. Like I loved it. Great food scene. It was cold, but then the last couple of days it warmed up. We were right on Lake Champlain. And the other thing that I thought was hilarious is that's like where Russillo went to college, right? That's his stomping grounds. And it just seems like such a non-Russillo place, but he loves it too. And you guys obviously did the show there a few years ago. It's kind of his homecoming.
You weren't with us.
I wasn't there. Yeah, no, but so I was on Church Street. We were hanging out. I mean, it's beautiful. It's amazing. So if anybody has a chance to get there, highly recommend Burlington. It's awesome.
A couple things from my time in Burlington. One, there was a place, I believe it's called the Vermont Flannel Company. I'll have to look it up to confirm. Softest flannel I've ever purchased in my life.
Walk past it. Yep.
Highly, highly, highly recommend. Whatever the price tag is, it's worth it on a cold winter night. Number two, they have a lot of, at least for the restaurants that I went to, natural wines.
Yep.
I would highly
so you were early on the natural wine thing. I just found out about that a couple of literally maybe a couple months ago.
Okay.
I have a buddy who's really into it, and they are really into it up there, and it's awesome. Some of them are carbonated. They're really good. And I'm not a big wine guy, but I actually did really like it.
They're really good. However, I would recommend talking to your server about some of the wines that they're going to serve, because for instance, when we first got there, Ray Netchie, shout out to Ray and Elizabeth, our friends who were there on the show. We went out to dinner at this place and they had a natural wine selection. And I asked them to describe some of the wines. And one of them they described as having heavy barnyard notes. So I went ahead and passed on that one. Because that's kind of the last thing I want my wine to smell and taste like, is a barnyard. So I would just recommend talking to your servers about what you might experience from a palate standpoint before you order those wines.
I will say speaking of barns, there was like a lingering manure smell throughout the entire town, which for some reason didn't piss me off. I felt like it was part of the ambiance of the place. I don't know. But it was definitely there for sure.
Yeah.
And but natural wine, very, very good. There's a restaurant. I don't know if you went there when you were there, but it's amazing. And it's like one of the best restaurants in New England. It's called Hen of the Woods.
Of course we went. Of course.
Okay. One of the best dinners I've ever had. I posted a picture of it in my Instagram story, and I had a guy respond, literally say like, that's one of the best restaurants in New England, period. And he was right. Awesome. It was awesome. So if you're over there, hit it up.
It was great. And then the third thing I would say is if you're there, obviously the scenery is great, but you have to go to Ben and Jerry's, right? If you're in Vermont, you need to go to Ben and Jerry's.
We actually did not go to Ben and Jerry's.
Steve.
I know, but I don't know. Ice cream. I love ice cream. Is my favorite dessert. I prefer it over cake. It's not like I'm a very pro ice cream dude. But I can get Ben and Jerry's like anywhere. It's fine. I don't know. It is what it is. I know. Maybe that was a miss on our part, but it was also cold outside, so we weren't really feeling the ice cream vibes. It was more like I don't know.
I don't want to hear about it being cold. I'm wearing a puffer jacket because it's snowing.
That's true. What's happening right now? Is it cold in your apartment? Your heat broken?
I was just outside. It was 70 degrees. And then the next day it snowed for 6 hours. Huge flakes, Steve, like this big of flakes coming down.
This is why I've always maintained spring is the fucking worst. It's the worst season. honestly, the shorter it is, the better. Like I'd rather go straight from winter, and we kind of do now anyway, because there isn't really as much of a spring as it feels like there used to be.
Right.
I would be okay if it snowed up until like the end of March, and then April hits and it was like 60 and sunny. But it's not, because we get this teaser. It's like it's kind of like a blue ball situation, if we're being honest. Like you get a 70-degree day, like you said, and then you get snow. It's like, fuck this shit. This is bullshit. I hate it. So that's why spring, by far worst season. That maybe, I don't even think that's a hot take. That's just the truth.
Well, no, winter's the worst because
no, I love winter. I'd rather have winter than spring, because it's Michelle.
Ridiculous.
If it's going to be cold, I don't want to be teased. One, and if it's going to be cold, I'd rather it be snowing than raining. Nothing is worse than a cold rain. Snow all you want. I don't care. I wish winter was shorter, but no. Spring by far the worst season, and then obviously we know fall. Summer and fall are I don't even know which one I'd put higher. I love fall. I love fall. What's up?
I know. By the way, you need to go to Burlington in the fall like I did, because the
leaves,
outstanding. They do this thing, leaf peeping. I think we've talked about that on the pod before.
Sounds
but
weird,
the leaves are majestic. We didn't talk about leaf peeping. People go to Vermont.
Yeah. People do that in New England, period. All
over New England.
Yeah, that's
it. But Vermont, especially in the fall, sensational.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I have something for you. I was going to say, while you were away,
I know where we're going.
There was major drama in the soccer world. Cerruti Super Bowl. I've been dying to talk to you, but I didn't want to bug you while you and Maddie and the dogs were away on your trip. I was like, you know what? Let Steve live. Like, let him live. I saw a lot of craft beer action happening.
I was living good.
I saw a lot of lake action happening, so I didn't want to bother you. But I'm dying to get your thoughts on the Super League that wasn't.
Okay. Do you understand? Like, what questions do you have? Because how much do I need to explain this for you? Because I think, or everyone, the audience in general, because I do have like an odd amount of knowledge on it, and I do have a couple of comparisons, but what in like 30 seconds, what do you think you know about the Super League?
Okay, here's what I think I know based on the headlines and very few paragraphs I read about it. That some of the top leagues in European soccer decided to form together to join a Super League, essentially out of greed. They would not have to face relegation, correct? And all of this had to do with the financial ramifications. The fans and media went bananas because they love the construct of the EPL and or UEFA, and essentially said to these people, why are you trying to ruin a good thing? We will not stand for it. And in a rare turn of events, greed took a big L and the fans took the W.
Close. A couple things I'll correct you on. One, the leagues themselves didn't get together. It was select teams in some of the top leagues. Yeah. So
I should have said clubs, not leagues.
It was 6 teams in England. There's 20 teams in the Premier League. The top 6 teams, which are called the Big Six, quote unquote, they were out. That's Arsenal, Man United, Liverpool, Tottenham, Man City, Man United. I think that's 6. Yeah. So your Leicester out. My Everton out. Don't even get it. We don't get a ticket. We don't get a seat at the table. That's it. Okay. Inter Milan, AC Milan, Juventus in Italy, so Roma out. Bullshit. Like, what are we doing? And then Real Madrid in Spain, Barcelona, Atletico Madrid. What happened too? So there was 12. Those are the 12 teams. And what happened was the German teams, which is Bayern Munich, who by the way are the reigning Champions League champions. They are the best team in the world, even though they got knocked out of the Champions League this year. But they're the best team in the world. They're amazing. Said like, we're not doing this. This is bullshit. We don't want anti-competition, which is awesome from them because that's just like a really cool gesture. And really, the entire German league deserves credit for just saying no, this is bullshit. We don't want to do this. And then PSG, who is basically owned by the country of Qatar. They're kind of in bed with UEFA, and they basically, that's the reason the World Cup is one of the reasons the World Cup is in Qatar in 2022. Yeah. So they are not in it either. So those are 2 big clubs to not be in it. It would be weird if they weren't in it because they're like, those are contenders. Not only Bayern won it, and PSG are one of the favorites to win it this year as well. Go ahead.
Can I ask you, so would that be like if the Steelers and the Patriots weren't in an NFL Super League? Is that a fair comp? Kind of.
Yeah. It would be like if the NBA made a Super League with just 12 of the teams and the Warriors weren't in it.
Okay,
like, ridiculous. Back in the day when they were nasty, like that doesn't make any sense. So the whole thing was bullshit. And then another thing I would correct you on is it's not that people like UEFA sucks. First off, FIFA sucks, but this is a classic. The enemy of your enemy is your friend, right? And you unite together to basically fight a greater evil, which was this stupid Super League. And to explain to people why this is bad, essentially, I'll explain the Champions League first. If you don't know, so in England, Germany, Italy, France, Spain, a few other countries and leagues across Europe, they basically, you qualify for this champions tournament, which is the best of the best teams from every single league. They qualify for this tournament by finishing at the top, in the top few spaces of their whatever competition in their home country. They play in the Champions League, and they play midweek games, and they're at night, and they're just like this huge spectacle. It's the greatest thing in the world, maybe other than the World Cup from a sporting perspective. And 12, the same clubs are typically in it every year. You know, it's mostly the same teams when it's the biggest teams. Like, it's not like there are like a lot of underdog stories going on in Champions League, but you know, there have been clubs like Leicester City who made the Champions League because they won the Premier League a few years ago, right? Atalanta's a team in Italy who are traditionally not a big team, have made waves recently because they've been really good. They're one of the best. They're one of the best teams to watch, period, in all of the world. They would not be invited to this tournament. They would not get in. So these 12 teams basically just wanted to say, hey, we don't want to compete in our leagues anymore because, you know, in England, there's only 4 spots for 6 of the big teams, right? And, you know, in Italy, you know, there's more than 3 teams that are really good, and they were only getting 3 spots in the Super League. So they basically were just like, hey, instead of having to qualify for this league, why don't we just make our own league where we're in it every single year, and then we can just keep all of the money and not have to deal with UEFA, basically. And I've heard a lot of, I don't want to call them dumb, they're just ignorant American sports fans who go, oh, what's wrong with the best teams playing each other? That's awesome. Like, what? That's stupid. It's like, they already do play each other. And it also would ruin it would really ruin the local country leagues. Like the EPL would be ruined because these bigger clubs would not care about the EPL, the Premier League, season, because they'd have bigger fish to fry in a Super League. And even if they had a shitty year, like Arsenal is in this freaking Super League, they're barely even a top half team in the Premier League right now.
Yeah, screw Arsenal.
That's your boy Stan Kroenke, which is another sort of layer to this thing, is that there are a lot of American owners. And I don't want to say it's their fault, but for example, Arsenal, owned by Stan Kroenke. Everybody knows how great of a dude he is. Liverpool, owned by Fenway Sports Group, John Henry. The Red Sox, they're the ones that traded away Mookie Betts to the freaking Dodgers and gave him a World Series title. So they're not exactly loved by their fans either. Who else? There's a couple other American owners. Oh, the AC Milan's owned by American owners. There's some owned by China. There's some owned by, what is it? Saudi Arabia is owned, the owners of Manchester City. The Glazer family owns Manchester United, right? They own the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's all these American teams that kind of wanted to sort of Americanize the sport, and it just wasn't necessary. And I think the biggest, and I'll let you ask a question after this, but let me just finish with this. I think the best comparison for this entire thing was and I heard this from Roger Sherman on Twitter, and it's great. It'd be like if the college football playoff, if Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Notre Dame, a couple of the big clubs just said, hey, screw the college football playoff. We're just going to play in our tournament every single year, and nobody else can get in, right? And we don't have to play in our conferences. Even if we go like 7-5 on the year, we're still going to be in this playoff tournament, and the regular season doesn't matter whatsoever. It's completely anti-competition. It makes no sense. It'd be like if every single year, instead of the 64-team NCAA basketball tournament, there were just 12 teams with Duke, Kansas, Kentucky, all the blue bloods, and none of the other small schools got to take part. So that's why it's bullshit. And luckily, fans protested, media members protested, everybody lost their freaking minds. And I think the PR backlash is probably too much. And these clubs just said, hey, we're sorry. 2 days in, they were like, hey, my bad. And they all, except for I think 2 clubs, backed out. I know that was a lot of information I threw at you very quickly. I tried to be as concise as possible, and I'm sure it's still very confusing. Fire your questions away. I'm sure you have a lot.
Thank you for that background information. Very helpful. Question number 1. The fans are obviously very pissed about this. The teams have backed out. I saw Arsenal, even though we hate them, apologize, which a lot of other clubs did not. But how are these clubs going to be able to bounce back with the fans?
It's going to be difficult. Now, Arsenal apologized. Liverpool, John Henry, I mean, he had this just awful video where he was like, oh, we got it wrong. We're sorry. I'd rather you not apologize because I know you don't mean it. You don't care. Right. You know, like all of a sudden in 2 days, you guys, you wanted the money. That's fine. I don't blame you for it, but don't blame me for being pissed off about it. And don't act like you're all of a sudden sorry because this thing blew up in your face. The question is, like, do these teams get punished? Right. And it's still kind of being figured out. It happens so fast that it's almost like they dip their toes in the water and like, oh shit, like we cannot be in here. And so I struggle a little bit with whether or not they should actually be punished. And when we talk about punishments, we talk about fines, we talk about banning them from the Champions League or the Europa League, there's been talk of like whether or not these teams should be relegated from their leagues, which will never ever happen.
I read
But,
that though, which
I
would
mean,
be unbelievable. If they wanted to be so greedy and form a super league and then they got relegated, that would be the ultimate kiss of karma.
yeah, because all this is about money, right? These clubs, yes, they are the driving force behind pretty much all the revenue for a lot of the other teams, right? I'm sure the Big Six in England make almost as much as the rest of the teams combined, right? Revenue for the league. And yeah, they could probably stand to make more money, but the spirit of competition and them being able to compete with these other teams is what makes sports great. You know, I think like 8 of the teams who are in the Super League either drew or lost over the weekend. Like, it's not like they're just like running riot. And then, yes, a lot of these teams win their leagues every year at the top of their leagues every year. No one's questioning that, but that doesn't mean you don't give the small guy an opportunity. And here's the other thing with like the financial stuff is if you find these teams are basically complaining that, oh, like, you know, COVID screwed us up and now it set us back because we didn't have the same revenues as we had, which is somewhat true, but it's also true that a lot of these clubs are awful. They're terribly run. Barcelona is the worst run club in the world. They spend a ridiculous amount of money on players that they shouldn't be buying just because they kind of think they have to buy star players. Real Madrid have not been very good recently. You know, Manchester City has like unlimited money, so you never know. Arsenal's been bad spending money. Tottenham just fired their manager. They're a disaster.
I saw that.
Arsenal haven't even finished in a Champions League place in 5 years, and they're going to get an automatic freaking bid into this Super League. AC Milan haven't finished in a Champions League spot in Italy in almost a decade. Yeah, they won the competition like 10 years ago, but they've been terrible ever since. And they're just trying to protect themselves when they make bad decisions, that they have a safety net, which is that they always keep getting that Champions League money. Because when you make the Champions League, you get a shit ton of money. There's a reason like Leicester making the Champions League was a big deal because they got a shit ton of money. Right. And these clubs just want to ensure that they never miss out on those checks. And so if you find them, they're going to say, oh, we're already in a bad financial state. So the whole punishment thing, I don't think they're going to be punished. I mean, they'll get a slap on the wrist, maybe a small fine, but people were throwing relegation out there, which was kind of interesting as well.
Okay, so you answered a bunch of my questions in that one answer, which was great because I was going to ask about punishment. I was going to ask about the overall motive for this. You mentioned the fans. I don't know if you have the answer to this, but what did the other organizations who weren't involved in the Super League, how did they respond to this? Because I would imagine if I'm looking at a team like Arsenal, who hasn't been good in a long time, and they're thinking we should just get an automatic bid, and I'm a team like Leicester City, who's been far more competitive in recent years, so that would certainly piss me off.
They were all pissed. Now, here's where I struggle, because reportedly, not all the teams that were in the Super League were actually super pumped about it. They were just kind of like, if we don't join, we're going to get left behind and miss out on all this money.
Classic peer pressure.
Yeah. So the rumor is, or, you know, I don't know if it's a rumor, it might even be fact. I don't know. I'm not a reporter, but this is what I've read, is that basically Juventus, Real Madrid, Manchester United, and Liverpool were the big drivers behind this. And Chelsea and Manchester City weren't really that into it, but they were just like, well, we can't say no, because then what are we going to do? We're not going to be in this tournament and make all this money. It's you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And it's really hard to say, I'm going to be a good person and not do this, which is what Bayern and a lot of the German teams did. So they deserve credit. Arsenal and Tottenham, they're just like, they're the kid in dodgeball that's just pumped to be picked. They were like, whoa, you guys want us to be a part of this tournament? That's amazing. We're in. Where do we sign? I will sign anything to be in this tournament, because you're right. They haven't been as good recently. And so all the other teams were very pissed off, but it's easy to be pissed off. This is where I'm like, all right, you got to take it with a grain of salt. It's easy to be pissed off when you're not chosen. Would they have had the same energy if they were one of the teams picked? Would they have actually denied it? Some of them maybe, but some of them probably would have said yes too. It's just a matter of circumstance. So all the clubs came out and were like, this is embarrassing, and rightfully so. They all just trashed it. And because, I mean, honestly, especially for some smaller clubs, I mean, if you're looking in the Premier League, Leicester would probably be fine. Everton would probably be fine. But if you get to the bottom of the Premier League, and then you start talking about even the Championship division, which is the second tier, and then the third tier of English football, those clubs depend on a lot of the revenue that some of the bigger clubs give them, right? They probably wouldn't be able to exist without the pyramid system in English soccer, English football. Same thing with Italy, same thing with all the other countries. So by these clubs breaking away, they were really going to impact the bottom line of even some of the smaller clubs, which the cool thing about English and Italian and German and Spanish teams is that they're really like part of the community. It's not really like pro sports in America where, there are these big conglomerates like the Yankee, like these clubs were started by poor workers who just like playing the sport, and they just like organized and they got it together. And these clubs are like, it's very rare in America for like a stadium to be in a neighborhood. Like a lot of these stadiums in these European cities, and some of them are towns, like they're not even cities. Like some of the teams in the Premier League aren't really cities, like Wolverhampton is not a big place. I mean, Brighton, they're cities, but they're not huge. Bournemouth is like a small town. And their stadiums are in the community. They are part of the community. So you're really talking about like ripping the hearts out of these fans and the bottom line of these smaller clubs. So they were very pissed off, and they were all wrote in and said how angry they were, blah, 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 blah. But, if they were invited to this thing, would they have said yes? It's hard to tell. I would probably say yes, but we'll never know.
Interesting. Okay, 2 more for you. Number 1, clearly I see Kroenke Out trending worldwide, and that piques my attention because I know what a terrible person he is, what a terrible owner he is. And I clicked on a headline today that said, essentially, a lot of these clubs are feeling the backlash and that the fans have gotten their way. Will pushing Stan Kroenke out be next? This was in a paper in England. Yeah. Will any of these owners, whether it's Stan Kroenke or any of the other owners, face any sort of ramifications from that point to where they're going to be forced to make a move or potentially put someone else as the face of this because they're catching so much heat?
I don't think they'll ever be forced to sell. There have been articles written about, and they didn't name names, but owners saying that they would look to sell their clubs after this, which would probably be a good thing for the sport. I mean, the problem too is that, especially in England, they've let a lot of people from outside of the country come in, not only from America, but as I said, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and it's a lot of money. It's a lot more money than these clubs have ever had. And they don't really understand the history. And like, who am I, some kid from Connecticut from the States who's like talking about the history of England? But I appreciate it. I'm not trying to like change it. It is what it is. The reason I like it is because it's different and cool, and it's a local vibe. Even though these clubs are big worldwide brands, they still are from a place, And so a lot of these owners are I think they're pretty tone deaf, and they don't understand how it really works within the system, the greater system of like English soccer or Italian soccer or whatever. And so I don't think they'll ever be forced to sell, but I think they would probably be open to it now. Kroenke, I have no idea. I mean, I know the fans would love it because they've hated Stan Kroenke ever since he got there. They just don't think he spends enough money. They don't think he's never there. I mean, I think his son runs the club really too. Was it Josh? I think is the guy's name. I don't even remember. But yeah, so I don't know if he'll sell. The Glazers, who are the owners of Manchester United, they have said that they're not going to sell, but there was rumor that they might. And then their chairman, their CEO, this guy Woodward, who United fans hate anyway. Apparently, he's going to be out at the end of the year because of this. So I think you could see some of these clubs get sold because the owners just say, well, I don't want to sign up for this anymore. Like because I'm just getting so much bad press. But I kind of doubt it because they're probably rolling in the money anyway. And some of these guys are stubborn too. And they're going to be like, well, screw you. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to own this club. And I don't really care what you think. So maybe 1 or 2, but I don't think very many. And I don't think Arsenal will sell. I think Kroenke's too stubborn.
0 F's given by him, by the way, about fans hating him. I can promise you that. Yeah,
because clearly a lot of these clubs, they buy these clubs as investments, right? And I get that sports is a business, but if you don't, you have to respect the tradition. You have to respect what this club is about. And a lot of these guys don't do that. They come in, they want to change everything and modernize everything and make everything the way they want it to optimize, the profit and the bottom line. And like Arsenal, for example, they laid off a ton of their staff during COVID, right? They laid off a ton of their staff. They fired their mascot, Gunnersaurus, which is like this giant dinosaur who had been their mascot forever. They fired Gunnersaurus. This is how shitty this is how shitty Stan Kroenke is. This is how shitty Arsenal is.
I'm aware, but like, you're going to fire the mascot. You couldn't have taken that money and allocated it to keep the mascot around.
No. So it's complete and utter bullshit. And they got crushed for it. And, it just seemed unnecessary. It's all about greed. It's all about trying to basically it's like somebody who comes and buys a company and just guts it and tries to maximize the profits while still being kind of relevant. That's what they kind of try to do. And it sucks because, the fans are sitting here going, well, we're paying higher ticket prices than we ever have before. Merchandise is through the roof. One of the things that the Real Madrid owner was saying was like, oh, people between the ages of 18 or 16 and 24 aren't as into soccer anymore. And one of the reasons is because it's so fucking expensive to be a fan. It's hard you gotta follow these leagues, to go to games. Like it's cost more than ever. And he was talking about making the games shorter than 90 minutes because for people's attention spans, soccer is like the shortest sport there is.
Yeah. Are you kidding?
If baseball
games were 90 minutes, I'd be the happiest girl on earth. We're talking 4 hours sometimes.
So these guys, long story short, these guys are so out of touch. I mean, and it's all about greed. It's all about money. And they don't really care about the history and the traditions of each club.
Okay. Final question. You mentioned these guys are out of touch. They've clearly pissed everyone off. Even though the Super League isn't happening, fans are furious. Is this decision and this move to even attempt a Super League enough to turn fans off from soccer permanently? Some fans.
No. I think if the Super League had happened, a lot of people would have watched it, but I do think there would still have been a faction, and I don't know how big it would be, but I think there'd be a decent sized chunk of people who would say, I'm out. I don't want to take part in this. And then you'd have the weird 2 competition thing too, because if Bayern and PSG and some of those other clubs weren't in the Super League, those are some of the best teams in the world. So you could have Bayern winning the Champions League and then like Real Madrid winning the Super League. And you're like, well, who's the best team in the world? We don't even know. So it would have created like kind of a clusterfuck competitively to figure out who the best team in the world every year is. But I don't think people will leave now that they've sort of walked it back. I think if they had stayed, it probably would have made a shit ton of money because these are huge clubs and they have huge fan bases and people want to watch the best teams play. I get that. But they would have alienated some of the smaller teams. For me as an Everton fan, if I was just an Everton fan and didn't, follow the sport as a whole, I'd be like, well, I'm not watching this bullshit. My team's on it. So I don't think they'll lose fans because of how it went down. And because the cool thing that happened throughout all this is not only was it the fans that were pissed off, not only was it former players that were pissed off, not only was it the media that was pissed off, the players themselves on the current clubs, many of them came out and were like, we don't want this. First off, none of them were even involved in this decision making. It was basically the highest of the high, like 2 to 3 people at the top of every single major club. They were the only ones that were really privy to any of this information. So the players, when they found out like all of us. There was a report from somebody who I was reading basically saying that it was a reporter. He was saying, I had players texting me, asking me what the hell was going on because they had no idea, like big name players.
Huge mistake.
Yeah. So I don't think they'll lose popularity or fans because the players themselves were on their side in this. It was really just the greedy sort of owner CEO types that wanted all this. And I think it's easy to sort of say, all right, let's go back to normal. We can still hate the higher ups and all these executives, but the core of the game, the managers, the players, the former players, the media, all those people, they were not a part of this. So I think you can get off scotch-free. The interesting part was that when this whole thing was going down, the Super League was like potentially proposed. FIFA was threatening, saying anyone who plays for any of those teams, you're not eligible to play in the World Cup, which would have been next summer. And these players would have been like, well, fuck that. The World Cup is like what people want to. Club competitions make a lot of money and it's great and they're yearly, but the World Cup is the biggest sporting event in the world, period. Right. So for you to
play for your country, right?
For you to potentially deny these players playing for their home country, that would have been a big fucking deal and it would have been a problem. So no, I think it'll be fun.
Okay, well, this was so informative. Thank you, Cerruti, not only co-host of the pod, but our resident soccer insider or a football insider.
Yeah, small talk. You're home for soccer.
We've got MLS coming to St. Louis, so we're going to get on the MLS bandwagon, and Cerruti's got your European soccer ready to go all the time. We didn't even mention this, Steve. We have a guest this week. Yep. We talked about it at the end of the pod last week, but we're going to talk to Jason Fitz of ESPN, and he's going to join us here in a second. Well, as Cerruti and I mentioned, we are so thrilled to welcome in our guest to Small Talk this week. It's Jason Fitz. You, of course, hear him on ESPN Radio from 7 to 9 Eastern, Monday through Friday, and you see him on ESPN socials, on all sorts of various ESPN platforms. Jason, we know you're super busy. You actually just wrapped your radio show, so thank you for giving us some of your time.
First of all, thank you for having me. And second, you guys are awesome. And I just have to say this because I think one of the things I didn't know coming out of the music business and into sports was how it would be received, how people would receive me, how much benefit of the doubt. I knew the fans would hate me. That's just the way it goes. They hate everything new.
Yep.
But the great thing about ESPN and with you guys particularly is that y'all were so open and welcoming. And I wasn't used to that. The music business is much more like dog eat dog, frankly, than the sports broadcasting businesses. And like, I realized that quickly, largely because you guys. So I'd come on with you anytime you ever want. I'm happy to be here.
It's
That's nice. Thank you.
it's funny. I don't know if you remember this, Michelle, but because Fitz, you did like some ESPNU stuff. It was you, it was a Golick Jr.
Yeah.
You were doing a college football show. And I remember like we'd always have the TVs on. And like I didn't know who you were at the time. I'm like, there's this guy who's tatted up. You and Golick Jr. tatted up. It was awesome. And I was like, who is this guy? Like, and people, oh, Jason Fitz, like, here's his background. He's, was obviously a music guy in Nashville, played the fiddle in different bands. I'm like, what's he doing talking college football? Like, what's going on? I was so fascinated by like you being able to make the jump from one, as you said, very competitive field to sort of another competitive field in like the sports media industry. And doing that sort of, as a young guy and as a successful guy, I had always just sort of admired you for doing that because not a lot of people are willing to take a risk like that. So from the jump, I just respected like your work ethic because I know like it probably wasn't easy to do that at first, but like, were you nervous when that happened? Like how did that go down? Because I don't know if a lot of people necessarily know that.
So, the funny thing is I had podcasts like when I was with the band Perry, our busiest year, I was gone 300 days. And I remember coming home to my wife and saying like, hey, I'm good at this and I'm thankful to do this. I played the violin since I was 4. Like this is all I've ever done my whole life. I just don't love it. And she said, okay, if I asked 100 of your friends what you really love, what would the answer be? And I said, sports. So she was like, all right, find a way to talk about sports. And I felt so dumb that I took all of like my string recording equipment and I sat in my car and I did a podcast because I didn't even really know how to do a podcast. I was just like, all right, I know how to edit vocals and strings, so I should be able to figure this out. And like, I put a podcast up on Facebook for my friends, and it was the most exhilarating rush for me that like, it was unreal just to talk into a mic for 10 minutes. So I ripped it apart and I figured out like what I wanted to build was a show where I could talk to music guys about sports and sports guys about music. But really what I wanted to do was make like great relationships. And if that's all that ever came from it, at least, it was my way to try and make friends with the Adam Schefters of the world. And so like, that was my whole initial approach, but then it just became my beast. And like, everywhere we were, I put up an episode every week. And so it didn't matter. I remember sitting in a coffee shop in Norway, yelling into a microphone about the Packers. And like, it was life. But the funny thing is, when I got the call for that college football show on ESPNU, and it was me and Elika Sadeghi and Michael Jr. Didn't know anybody. I got the call and they said, look, can you be in Charlotte tomorrow to meet with some people? We're interested. So it was the first day off I'd had in like 8 months. I flew to Charlotte. I had sushi with the guy and I'm like, I don't know if he liked me or not. The next day they offer me this show. But the crazy thing about contracts in the music or in the sports business world, for anyone that doesn't know, is when you start out, you start on what they call a usage deal. So they offered me a deal where they could fire me after one show. And that was just the way it was going to be. And so I went to the band and I said, can I have Mondays off? And, for this stretch for this show, and we weren't touring. So it was like, yeah, no worries. But at the very last second, there was a show that was on the books and they just weren't comfortable letting me miss it. So I sat down with my wife and I was like, what do we do? And she's like, yeah, you get offered a TV show on ESPN, you quit. So I quit the band with no idea how, like, I quit the band and could have made $1,000 total in my life. I like no idea how we were going to keep the lights on. Like, but I was like, all right, you jump, right? Like that's the risk you take. And the funny thing is we didn't have a rehearsal. We didn't do any like sort of run throughs. I met Mike and Elika a few hours before we were live, and 5 minutes before we went live on TV, our producer handed me a rundown, as I now know, handed me the rundown. He said, here's your rundown. I was like, cool. What's a rundown? And he's like, oh my God. Right. And like, but at some point, like entertainment's entertainment, and, being able to keep energy and being able to keep focus and do the job at hand is was part of my life. And, in the music business, you wear these little in-ear monitors and people communicate the whole show. So I'm used to talking to and being talked to other people during a show while I'm playing a fiddle solo. I'll step on a mic and be like, hey, we're going to skip the next song. We're going to go over there and nod if you got me. So if you ever see anybody on stage nodding, they're communicating. So I was like, okay, this isn't that different. I just have to stay focused on what Mike's saying. And I remember we were like 3 episodes in and the producer was still like in my ear constantly. He's like, we're going to go to 825 next, like talking the language. And finally he was like, react to Mike. And we went to break and I was like, hey, bud, can't react to Mike if you're talking to me the whole time. So like there was this weird progression of learning, but I was scared out of my mind. I mean, I'd be lying otherwise. And, that was August 26th, I think, of 2016 was my last show with the band Perry. It was the Alaska State Fair. It was on a Saturday. And on Monday, I did my first TV show. And, before you know it, I was on ESPN radio, and like life changed. It was really surreal to see that process. But I do tell people all the time, I'm new to sports, or was new to sports, particularly at the time, but I've been in the entertainment business since I was 8, so like that part of it's pretty old hat to me.
That is a great story. I want to hone in on one part. What was the band's reaction when you told them, I'm walking away and I'm going to do it for something that's not a sure thing?
I think everybody was stunned, and the funny thing is there were a lot of guys, like we were on tour for a long time with different acts that were huge. And we spent a good year on a Rascal Flatts tour, and the Rascal Flatts guys used to make fun of me every week. Cause I'd be standing side stage before sound check, like talking into a microphone plugged into the side of a laptop. I'm like, sorry, doing my open, hold on, and they used to mock me so much, like just cause it looked dumb. Right. And what do I know about sports? Why is anyone going to hire me? And obviously I put a lot of work into it. But the funny thing is, when Flats was up in Connecticut, I was backstage hanging out with some of the guys, and some of the crew guys were like, we owe you an apology because you're on TV a lot now. And I'm like, dude, you put in the work. But yeah, I think everybody was really stunned to see me walk away. And for the band, I was playing the fiddle, but I played 6 instruments. I was the music director. I built the tracks. I ran the tracks. Like I ran that show. So it was a heck of an adjustment for them, not because I'm some god, but because I was doing a lot of different jobs. And like, anytime you have to replace that much at once, I think it's a little stunning. So, it's still a little surreal when I look back on it. I tell everybody, bet recklessly on yourself, but that's also easy to do when we never had kids. Like to me, I grew up, I moved around a lot as a kid. So like, to me, roots don't really exist. So I'm like, all right, let's go. I got to move to Connecticut. Let's go.
Well, we want to get to sort of your background and being like a musical savant, really, and like the Juilliard stuff, and because it's all really interesting. Because I don't think, I've always heard the name Juilliard, but I don't think I know fully exactly what the deal is, like what it is. But I think like I want to just one thing that you just said. When you're on the road, like, do any of these guys like sports, or girls like sports? Did you have anyone to talk about sports with, or you just kind of in your own head? Like, did Rascal Flatts, were they sports fans, the band Perry, any of these people, or were you just kind of like on an island in this musical thing? And the other part that I think is interesting is we always talk about athletes that, oh, this guy doesn't love to play the sport, or like he's really good, right? He's talented. We talk it happens a lot with centers in the NBA, right? They're just 7 feet tall. It's like, here's a basketball, play basketball. And they don't love basketball. For you to acknowledge that, hey, I'm really good at playing this instrument, or I'm really good musically, but I don't love it. That's a tough thing. That has to be a tough thing to grasp. That's a 2-part question, but feel free to answer whichever one you want.
Well, no, I think not a lot of guys or girls in the band Perry were sports fans at all, but they all respected the fact that I was. So like, Sundays, there was never a fight to get the TV on football, right? Saturdays, never a fight. A lot of country acts are big college football fans. So you find people on tour. One of my best friends for years, unfortunately has passed, was our merch guy. And he had the checkerboard tattoo on his leg of the Vols, the Tennessee Vols end zone. And so every Saturday when he would wake up, he'd just start screaming, "Go Vols!" And so still to this day, in his memory, on Saturday mornings, I don't really care if the Vols win. I just scream, "Go Vols!" just for him. So I think, you find guys on tour that you have that relationship with. But as far, what was the other part of it? It was a 2-part.
Yeah. Sorry about
acknowledging,
like loving what you're great at.
Like, so I used to text my wife before every show time to make the donuts, and after every show I'd text her money earned. And to me, it was never not that it was about money, but it was about, for me, it was about precision. My job was to make sure that a show was perfect. And frankly, I never really cared if the crowd liked it, because the way I was raised, it didn't, audience approval isn't what you do it for. You do it to be the best at what you do that particular night. So that was so ingrained in me that I looked at every show like a game plan. Like, how do I come in and execute this show perfectly, which means everything that Kimberly Perry needs, she's going to get, because she's got to be a performer. I've got to be an executionist. Right. And so like that was always my mindset. And in fact, later in our touring time, when they would do like intros for all of us, and they asked like, what we wanted for each of us, like Kimberly came up to me one day and she's like, all right, so we're going to do intros in this section, and we'll throw you, like, you go out to the edge of the stage, and what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know, I'll just like do the Running Man or something. And she's like, you can't dance. And I'm like, that's the point. I don't really care about acknowledgement. So like, I'm just going to go out there, be an idiot, and then I'll go back and keep doing my job. And that's sort of how I looked at it. And again, not to not be thankful, but if you stand up in front of 75,000 people and you play a solo and you don't get an adrenaline rush, then you got to admit that, like, all right, this just isn't what feeds me. And the dumb thing about it, is that now, like, I've done a lot of radio shows and I've done a lot of digital shows and a lot of TV. I still get butterflies every time I'm about to start a show where I've got like this energy and it's like, hell yeah, this is what I'm meant to do. And so, I just didn't have that with music. But in fairness, I started playing the violin when I was 4. By the time I was 8, I practiced 8 hours a day. I got into Juilliard and played Carnegie Hall when I was 10. Like, I had put in, they asked me at ESPN when I first interviewed with anybody, they were like, what if you burn out? And I was like, all right, well, I gave music like roughly 30 years. So if I give you roughly 30 years here, you're going to be kicking me out the door,
Yep.
So I think burnout is it's a natural evolution when you've worked so hard.
That's so interesting that you bring up burnout, because Sports Illustrated, I don't know if you read this, the cover story for Sports Illustrated this week is about mental health issues in baseball. And a lot of players are coming out now and they're talking about the pressures of performing at a high level, but also how the burnout factor is real and it's contributing to mental health issues. And I wonder if it's because a lot of these people, just like you, have something that they're highly and uniquely talented at, and their parents and the evolution of someone that's a prodigy or someone that's really good at something is to basically focus your entire life on it from the time that you're a kid into your adolescence and then into your adulthood. And you miss a lot of things along the way when you're really, really good at something and you're pouring all of your energy into something that eventually burnout is just going to happen. And I'm just curious, at what point did you realize I'm really good at this, but I don't want to do it anymore?
Oh gosh, high school. I mean,
Wow.
that early, it was like, I don't, for me, it wasn't that I didn't necessarily want to do it anymore. It was that I knew I didn't love it, but I knew it was a gift that I'd been given. And I knew that, like, I'd put all of this time into it. And also I'm such a pleaser. Like, my parents put so much time, money, like I didn't come from anything. So for me to get these lessons was a huge strain on the family. And so, like, you do look around at some point and say, okay, a lot of people have made a lot of sacrifice. Now I have an obligation, and that, again, that was part of, like, the good and the bad of being a classical musician, part of how I was raised. Like, you're not competing against anyone else, you're competing against yourself, but you're also, like, you've got to be driven every day to be absolutely perfect. And, at the same time, you've got this expectation of perfection on everything that you do and the resources and time that it takes. Like, now you've made a commitment. And when I was little, if my mom's rule was ever, if I wanted to play or if I wanted to quit, I could quit, but I had to put in a 6-month notice. And for 6 months, I had to work my ass off. I had to play absolutely as hard every single day for 6 months as I ever have. And if at the end of 6 months, I still wanted to quit, I could walk away. Well, in that 6-month trajectory, you'll have a competition you win, or you'll have a big performance with an orchestra behind you. And you're like, oh, this is the best. And it's like, you still want to quit? No. So, like, you find that cycle. But I think what happens, to your point with the baseball guys, and I know a few major league players and former players that talk about the mental grind of the season anyway. Like, it's a weird beast to realize that everybody that watches you expects you to be perfect every single time you do everything you do. And I realize nobody gives a damn about rich athletes wanting sympathy. But I had a former baseball player tell me one time, he said, imagine if you went out in front of the largest crowd you've ever played in front of, and you played your solo, and afterwards in front of that home crowd, people booed because they just didn't think it was good enough. And, like, that hit me, because we do that to athletes all the time. And then we wonder, and then we question their mental health if they want to talk about any of these issues. We question their fortitude if they want to talk about anything. And it's one of the most asinine things I think that sports fans do. Like, I tell people all the time, imagine, I don't care if you make widgets or spreadsheets. Imagine if somebody came up, sat by your desk, berated you the entire time that you did it, told you that you sucked at your job, told you that you sucked at life, and told you didn't deserve to live because you weren't great that day. Because that's what athletes deal with every single day. Maybe people don't care because the perception is they're playing a game and we all wish we could do that. But, man, they're still human beings. I think that's what we're learning. That piece does a great job of telling it. But we're learning that across sports. Like, these are human beings that happen to be gifted athletes.
Exactly. And the vulnerability that I think a lot of athletes are showing now is really welcomed, at least in my opinion, because you're right, they are human beings. And no matter how much you are good at your craft and you are on a highly pressurized situation, I just think it's never going to be naturalized for you to be in front of that many people, to have your results judged in the moment. You mentioned booing, then you have to go speak in front of maybe 50 to 100 people and answer questions about your performance, and then you have to open your phone and have thousands of people you don't know tell you suck. So I don't know how they do it, but I want to circle back to you being young and realizing that you're really good at this. And as Rudy mentioned, you went to Juilliard, which is so prestigious. It is so rare that people get accepted to Juilliard. People dream about it their entire lives, and only the best of the best go there. But I'm curious about what your experience from a social level was at Juilliard. What's it like when you get there? Is everyone hyper competitive and they don't socialize and it's not very fun? Or do people hang out? Is there any sort of party scene at Juilliard?
No, not that I like. So the track is really different for everybody, right? Like, and I will say that I think, theater kids have a different experience than classical kids have a different experience than dance kids. And then even within those, there's subsets. Like for me, because and I say this for anyone that doesn't know, I say this with humility. I don't talk about this stuff often because I don't want people to think that I'm full of myself and all of this. To say that, when I was little, I was basically fast-tracked into, there was a world-renowned violin teacher named Dorothy DeLay. And she was, at the time, every big name at some point has taken lessons from her. And when she identified that she thought I was talented at 10, that basically changed what my expectations were. So, for me, I was taking 3 lessons a week in different states at one point, with different teachers. You're doing all of that while you're still, like, for me, because we couldn't afford tutors, I had to actually do regular public schooling on top of the Juilliard schooling. So like my workload, was 19 hours a day by the time I was in 6th grade. So like, it's funny because those are the things that have made me great at what I do now. Like when we have particularly busy times and people are like, how are you still high energy and how are you still grinding? I'm like, I don't know. It's just it's been wired in me since I was a kid. But I think that changed any real shot at much of a social life. And that's where, like, part of the reason I do what I do is, like, when I was really little, my dad's a big Raiders fan, and his rule was on Sundays, he didn't want to listen to a cat dying in the background while he watched the Raiders. So he would go get a dozen donuts. We'd sit down together, we eat a dozen donuts, and we watch the Raiders game. So Sunday became my reprise from all things, and football became sort of my social aspect. Like I poured myself into these games and these athletes that I had absolutely no control over, because that fed some level of release for me. So it's funny that all of these things that, in some ways made life difficult also helped me. And the other thing I'll say too, when it comes to the social aspect, is when you're constantly on edge with your skills, for anyone that doesn't know, in the classical world, you may come in one day and you're the concertmaster, you're the first chair in an orchestra, and you'll come in one day and there's a sign up that says, seat auditions. And when I was 8 years old, I was in Las Vegas at the time before I got into Juilliard, I was playing in a college age orchestra. So I was the only kid that wasn't in college for this orchestra that went all over the country and won awards. And I was the concertmaster, I had the first chair. But you would walk in and it would say seat auditions. And if you blew that audition, you were reseated wherever you were reseated. So a whole year's worth of work gone from one bad audition that you didn't even know was coming, a blind audition. It taught me that you always have to be your best, but also as orchestras change and as people change and as tour buses change later in life, you realize you have to be able to evolve to the people that are around you. Like, you have to become somewhat conversational, because you might have a different stand partner this week than you had last week. You might be on a different tour bus next week than you are the week before. And all of that stuff, the ability to read the room and sort of figure out how to fit in, is something you learn, even not in a social way, you learn in a business way. But it really actually impacted my life in business to be able to walk into any show on ESPN and say, okay, who are my co-hosts? Great. How can I make sure my co-hosts are great today? Because that's what you do in music constantly.
Going back to Juilliard, because I just feel like I know the name, but I don't know anything else about it. You just know the prestige, right?
I'll tell you this, the movie Whiplash, for anybody that's ever seen the movie Whiplash, is incredibly accurate. And I had one teacher, Peter Malevsky, and Mr. Malevsky spoke very terrible English, and he had things on his desk. And if you made the same mistake twice, he would grab whatever is on his desk and he'd throw it at you. So, you'd have a snow globe come flying at your head. And that's real. Before I got to Juilliard, I had a teacher in Vegas that had retired from the Royal Conservatory of Music in London over to Las Vegas, renowned teacher at the time, and he had a prosthetic leg. And so if I played poorly, he would get really angry and he would just take his leg off and, threaten to hit me with it, which is funny now. But when you're like 8, you're like, oh my God. And you're playing an instrument where a centimeter is the difference between right and wrong, and where you may have been asked to memorize 4,000 little notes on a page and like in that week. So like the intensity of it is absolutely real. Like everything, Whiplash is sort of a caricature to a lot of people. It isn't for me. Like I've never made it through the entire movie because it is an uncomfortable reminder of how intense a lot of that was. But again, like when you've lived through that, like then, I'll never forget being on OTL and Outside the Lines on ESPN. And like, it's legit. Like I'm wearing a tie, I got a suit jacket on. They're giving me a big shot. And I look over at one camera and they're like, we lost all comms. The interview's dead. So I spin my chair to the other camera and they're like, we just lost more comms. We have nothing we can offer you. So I just looked at the camera and I'm like, all right, y'all, it's live TV and nothing's working. So we're going to go to break and see what happens. And when we came out of it, they were like, oh my God, how did you figure that out? And it's like, well, you spend enough of your years in a pressure cooker and pressure just doesn't bother you.
Your teacher is like the musical Bobby Knight, throwing things at you guys, unbelievable.
That's why I laugh when fans are like, you don't understand a locker room. And I'm like, you don't understand an orchestra room either, bud. So,
well, I actually wanted to ask you about that because, you obviously deal with a lot of athletes, a lot of athletes, you interview a lot of athletes, but you also know a lot of famous musicians and whether they're singers or in a band or whatever. What do you think, which lifestyle do you think is more difficult? Or are they equal? Because I mean, you're right. Like I've always thought about this, and for radio and TV, like you don't have you have an audience, but you don't see them. Whereas, and that has always worked for me. People are like, hey, you're on podcasts or TV, whatever. I just never think of the audience. But if I was in front of hundreds of thousands of people or tens of thousands of people at a concert, I don't know if I would handle that very well. So just in your experience of the two, like what is more difficult, at least, for most people?
So I think the sacrifice that it takes to make it to the absolute highest level in music is actually bigger than the sacrifice it takes to make it to the highest level in sports. No offense to anybody that does it. But I also think one difference is once you're there, once you hit cruise control in music, you can hit cruise control. Like I cannot play a violin for 6 months. And if I pick it up and I spend a couple of weeks really working on it, I can get most of my fingers back. I can go out and play. Like that's not a big deal. You can't do that in sports, right? Or even in what we do. Like you have to, with sports media, you have to consistently continue to listen and learn and watch and consume. Like, so there's more homework. Like the work never ends on that side. I do think on the music side, you reach a spot where you are just general maintenance and you can sort of pull back. But the sacrifice it takes to get there, like, you can look around the landscape right now, country music, for example. Like I was a fiddle player and everybody thinks country and fiddle players. I was, and I think still would be, the only fiddle player that's ever been a band leader in modern country music. Like I was the only music director doing it. Like you start thinking about how many violinists there are, how many fiddle players there are, and you're going to get into the tens of thousands. And then you've got maybe 6 guys touring out of Nashville. Like the numbers of trying to make it are actually much tougher in music. So I think it takes more to get there, and you have to give up more music because the hours it takes more to get there in music, but it takes more to stay there in sports.
You've led the most interesting life. I could talk to you for hours. I'm so curious about all of these things that you've done, but I want to touch on your time on tour, because I think a lot of people, they look at music and they look at the industry and the tour life from the outside. And we have this image in our head that you're standing on a stage and you're playing in front of all of these people who are singing your songs, and then you're partying into the wee hours, and it's just this continuous cycle. But what is the one thing about tour that people don't understand?
There's more protein powder on most tour buses than alcohol. And like, that's
wow, really?
And look, I don't think I'm violating any great trust here, but I'll tell you that more often than not, when you see Blake Shelton on a stage with the red Solo cup, if there's any liquor in it, there's very little liquor in it. Like, so you party like a maniac when you first get out on the road, because you can't believe you're on a tour bus. And then inevitably what happens is you realize about 200 straight days into it that you can't function, you're playing terribly, and you can't even handle the next meet and greet that you have to do. So like it normalizes. And then you realize, like I had an awakening with one of the first acts I played with, a guy named Phil Vassar. And Phil in the late 90s, early 2000s had so much success. And when I started touring with him, it's like mid 2000s. And he was at that spot where like he sort of had his run. He was doing really well, but he wasn't rising the same way. And Phil looked at everything as such a business and such a performance, like the need to stay in shape and all of these things. And I was looking around thinking like, what are you worried about? Let's have a good time. And he really explained, he's like, at some point it will sink in. This is your job now. And just like you can't go to Walmart every day drunk, or any days, you can't do this and do it at the level you want to do it if you live a certain way. And that's true, particularly in country. I can't say in pop, they tour a lot less in pop. They can get a lot of crazier. But for us, like, baseball, hockey, marathon sports are very similar to country music touring. And so you realize quickly that if you want to be able to play well in November and in March, you got to take care of yourself. So most buses party a lot less than you think. Yeah, it really is. A lot less partying than anybody thinks. And like a lot less sightseeing. Like you become very routine oriented. Like when you're on a tour, like a huge tour, like Brad Paisley or, Rascal Flatts or Keith Urban, you wake up in the morning and you're at the venue you're going to be in, but there's only one like runner that will take people around for the day. And they really have set runs they have to make. So you spend most of your day either at the hotel, if you're going to shower, or at the venue, if they have showers. So like, there's not a big difference when you're playing between playing Paducah or playing Vegas, because you're really underneath an arena when you're on big tours most of the day. So it's not as like you see the world, but you don't really see the world.
What's your favorite venue to play that you played
at? Madison Square Garden. When I was little, like I said, because we didn't have much, I would my parents would give me lunch money for the week, and I just wouldn't eat, and I'd keep it. And after my lessons on Friday or Saturdays, if I could get out of rehearsals, I'd go down to the Garden. And this is like the Garden in the early mid 90s, not the Safe Garden, with whatever I had in my pocket, my violin. I'd just be like, hey, I got $4. What can you sell me? So after the puck, after the tip off, either one, I would just buy seats. So when we played the Garden, that was particularly emotional for me, because I was like, oh, I've sat there and there and there and there. Those are the moments, like, first time I played Merriweather Post Pavilion in DC, most people don't care about that, but I saw Hootie and the Blowfish there. So like to look at the seat you sat in is like, oh, this is, and I was on a tour that had Darius Rucker on it. So it's like these weird, those weird come together moments. I think those stand out as like big ones. But the craziest show was at Hyde Park in England. And it was only crazy because we were on this massive festival and we covered Fat Bottom Girls as one of the songs. We did a bunch. Nice. And I had a fiddle solo at the end. So I ran out to the end of the ego ramp, catwalk, whatever you want to call it. We always called it the ego ramp because you got to get out there and feel like you're a star. So I go out to the end of the ego ramp and I was playing the solo of the Fat Bottom Girls, and I looked out and there were like 110,000 people there. And they certainly weren't there just for this band. They were there for a festival. But when you look out and think, man, I never would have imagined that 110,000 people in England would give a damn about the music I had to make. Like that was very surreal.
A lot of people love country music because it's very relatable. I know when I listen to country, it feels like, oh, I'm just a Midwestern girl. We're talking about beer and hanging out with our friends and our dogs and love and all of these things. And I think part of that is country musicians feel very relatable. They feel more relatable than a Beyonce or a J-Lo, someone that I'll never be. I think I look at a lot of country artists and I think that looks like a good hang. We could sit around a bonfire and have a few pops together. So tell me who the best hang in country music is.
Oh, that's a good question. So, wow. Okay. Depends on what kind of hang you want. I think Luke, Bryan, and the guys probably have the most fun, like the most energetic fun. Like there's always going to be like cornhole outside the bus. And it doesn't matter if it's before the show or after the show, somebody's out there playing, like just having a good time. Like those guys are just loving life on the road. So that makes them a really, really fun hang. I think, Jodan from Flats, like he's such a like sports fan that he's just a fun watch. Like he's a fun guy to sit on the bus and watch college football with, as opposed to Brad, who's like super intense on it. But I think the nicest human on the road might be Keith Urban. Like I'll never forget the first show we played with Keith, and he walked up on my riser and I'm setting up all these instruments and he's like, "Hey man, I'm Keith. Can I help you with anything?" And I'm like, your face is right here and it's in a big poster. I think I got you.
No,
but that was that was, and I didn't see him after that tour for months. And we were backstage at the country or the ACMs, the Academy of Country Music Awards in Vegas. And he was backstage with Nicole, and a few of the band guys were backstage with our wives, and Keith walked up with Nicole and he's like, Nicole, meet these guys. And like, he remembered each of our names and introduced our wives. And it was just like a really cool, like give a damn moment. And, you know, I think you're right. Like country artists are more relatable. It takes them longer to make it. They make way less money, honestly. And they have to work 10 times harder. They have to do 10 times as many shows. And they understand that like, this is a long journey. And when you know it's a long journey, I think your feet stay grounded better than they do like when you have overnight success.
That's a great segue, Fitz, because Michelle and I were talking about this before we had you. And, you know, I consider myself like, I like music. I've liked music my entire life, but I was never really into country growing up, like when I was in my teens, even into college or whatever. And for whatever reason, I found country music like later in life. I mean, like I say later, I mean, I'm in my, early 30s, but the last couple of years, I've just gotten more into country, and not like the party country, not the, like the, Florida Georgia
New
line,
country,
like that kind of
new
thing.
Country.
But, my favorite albums of the last couple of years are not only country albums, but they're female country albums. Like I love the Casey Musgraves album, Golden Hour. Maren Morris, I obviously love. I went to a Chris Stapleton concert a couple of years ago with my wife at Woodstock, and it was one of the best concerts I've ever been to in my life. I'm into Sturgill, and it's weird because I don't know why it took me so long to get into country music, but there is like a stigma, especially because, I was from Connecticut, although there is like a pretty big country faction of fans in the Northeast. It would kind of surprise you. But I've always been interested in what kinds of music people listen to, right? I know what I like, and I feel like I have a pretty eclectic view, but like, what are the acts that you listen to now, or like the last 5 years? What are some of your favorite albums? Are they all country? Is it more like, are you into rap? Like what does Fitz listen to, who is a highly trained musician?
Understanding, like I grew up a classical music kid, and my mom was super into the Eagles. My dad was into like doo-wop. So like those were the things that I was exposed to as a kid. My first concert was Bon Jovi. So like that era of hair metal, like that was a big transformation for me. And when I was in Chicago for a few months studying with a violin professor there. And my roommate was at the time, world-renowned trumpet player. And he came in one day and he quite literally threw away every CD I owned. And he left 2 CDs on my desk. And he said, the rest of the music you listen to is trash. You've got to listen to these. And it was Stevie Wonder, Songs of the K Life, and Aretha Franklin live at the Fillmore. And and he was right. His whole point was like, you got to learn to feel the groove a different way. And so like all of these things along the way, like I went to high school in PG County in Maryland. So, at that point, I went to a high school where when Eazy-E died, they hung banners off of the side of the high school. Like they listened to was urban music. So like for me, Boyz II Men in the mid 90s was a huge influence because I love anything with vocals on it. So like all that to say, like I've never really pinned myself into any one genre that I like. I listen to New Music Friday on Spotify every week because I want to make sure that I stay as relevant as possible. But like, most of what I listen to is any singer songwriter that feels like his life has gone to just complete shit. That's most of the time, like James Arthur sort of guys. Like I'm into anything that has tremendous emotion.
Yeah,
that's what I love to listen to.
So you must love Frank Ocean then, like me.
Yeah. I mean, like I want guys or girls that make you feel like the music makes you feel, and their vocal makes you feel. Like that's why years ago, and when I first started playing fiddle for bands in general, I at that point was a studio musician doing classical work. I took like 70s rock records and looked at guitar solos and said, okay, like how did they figure out Hotel California? How do I play that on a fiddle? Like what made this solo cool? What makes that riff cool? That's how I approached it. So everything for me had a real rock orientation. But over the years, I think for me, like British singer-songwriters, they just have so much like pull and power to what they're singing. It feels like they feel it. And so that's the stuff that draws me in all the time.
You did avoid though, really quickly. Give me at least one song that's like on a recent Fitz Spotify playlist. Give me something.
One song
that's somewhat new.
Hold on. I'm putting you guys on hold now. And I'm just putting on my Spotify.
Take your time.
This is what's gonna happen. So again, James Arthur is new. Like he has a new single out, Rehab. I love that. That is spectacular work. Need to Breathe is probably my favorite band out right now, and they just put out a new record, Live from the Woods 2 this week, which sorry guys, haven't listened to yet, but the first one's amazing. So I'm a big fan of that. On the country side, Brothers Osborne, Chris Stapleton are on my playlist right now. And unapologetically, I am a massive massive pop fan. So Bruno Mars is always on my playlist, as is the new Avril Lavigne. The new Avril Lavigne's pretty good. So
didn't know she had new music.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah.
Wow.
There you go. They used in the band, Kimberly used to always call me a Pop-Tart, and she meant it as a compliment. But like, if it's popular right now, like I love it. Like, I am definitely a top 40. Like, when Lizzo hit, and it didn't matter to me that I didn't know who Lizzo was up until that point. It consumed me for like a month, and then you're like, oh, I love this now. Like that's definitely me.
Fitz, I'm telling you, there's no shame there. I was just telling Michelle how I'm embarrassed that I didn't realize how great the Dua Lipa album was.
Oh, love Dua Lipa.
That record, I have been lucky enough to be a Grammy voter in my life, and that record for me, like, absolutely deserved the Grammy. 1,000% to me. Like, that record, front to back. Oh, I mean, that's a road trip record if ever I've heard one.
Yes, it is. Okay, Pop-Tart. Well, thank you for indulging our music questions for you. We, of course, want to ask you about sports. We were hoping to tape with you last week, but you have so many things going on, including some stuff for the NFL draft that's happening next week. So please fill us in on what you've been up to.
Yeah, so I went to LA last week, and for anyone that watched the draft in Nashville, I did vignettes with different country stars that they played throughout the draft, like little 30-second, 45-second things. Really cool moment for me to reconnect with some people. Unfortunate, as you guys understand well, that some of the best stuff never made it to air. Like, we had a great conversation with Darius Rucker about the limitations that he felt from radio, being a black man trying to make country music, like stuff like that. But we also got a ton of stuff that people saw from the Keith Urbans of the world, where we brought that back this year because the draft is next door to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So I had the chance to sit down with Joe Elliott at Def Leppard, Richie Sambora, who's like my personal, like my personal music hero. So Richie Sambora and I got to hang out, and like Shaka Khan, Earth, Wind and Fire, Joan Jett, like all these different acts to basically talk about the process of becoming a Hall of Famer. Like, the tie-in is that you overnight, your dreams come true, and you accomplish what you've worked your whole life for, and you suddenly have wealth and fame and fortune. You have all of these things coming together. How do you navigate those waters? And even though they may not be athletes, that's an interesting conversation to me from Hall of Famers. So you'll see those throughout the draft on ESPN and ABC, both throughout all 3 days of the network. Plus, shameless plug, I'll be on the digital shows the first 2 days of the draft, and then simulcast radio and digital on the third day of the draft hosting. So all over the place on the draft content.
Love it. Well, I'm trying to think. Raiders, like, what do they need in the draft? Like, really quick before we get you out, what do you want to see? Who do you want to see them pick?
The best defensive player available. The best, like, I've seen all these. Parsons keeps going, to
He's
in the mocks. Yeah, if Parsons slides to the Raiders, then I'm going to do naked cartwheels in the street and throw a parade. Like, he's way too good to fall that far. I will say that the Raiders need all the defensive help they can get, some offensive line help. What every fan can be excited about is that we are so stupidly quarterback obsessed in this draft that we're going to end up taking so many kids that never would usually be a top 5 pick, which means the Kyle Pitts of the world, this Penei Sewell of the world, the offensive lineman out of Oregon that's an absolute beast. I mean, you can go up and down the road. There are going to be picks available at 12, 13 this year that are usually top 5 picks because everybody wants to reach for Trey Lance. So, hey, good on them. Like, hopefully it works. But for all the rest of us, we can sit back and say, man, you can feast in the early teens, and that's not usually the case.
Jason, you are the best. We could have talked to you for 3 hours, but we want to be respectful of your time. Everyone needs to follow you on Twitter at Jason Fitz, because you're going to be posting all the things you're doing with the draft. And of course, listen to his ESPN radio show, Spain and Fitz, from 7 to 9 Eastern. We're going to have to do this again. I have so many more questions for you. We're going to have to definitely do this again.
I'm all in for it. I really appreciate you guys letting me come on.
Thanks, Fitz.
Steve, I meant it. I could have talked to Jason Fitz for 3-4 hours. What an interesting guy. What an interesting life he's led.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by people who obviously are elite at what they do. And then there's so few of those people. And then the people that leave that and say, hey, I'm really good at this. I'm one of the best in the world at it, but I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do something different. It just takes balls. Like, it just does. And that's why I've always respected him. And on top of him, he's just a great dude. Like, he's one of the guys that, like, just to have a beer with and shoot the shit and talk about life with, he's one of the best. Like, I would say he's up there. Will Cain's up there. But just like a fascinating background. And, one of the things I wanted to ask him but we didn't get to, so we'll have him on again, but I've struggled. And he talked about, like, I think musicians make their best music when there's, like, something wrong right in their life, whether, like, Hozier's album, when he was, like, a recovering heroin addict, like, how you can't replicate that. Right. And Hozier made this great album, but he could never make that album again because he's not a heroin addict anymore. You know what I mean? Like, or your heart only, that's why the Taylor Swift stuff, and we didn't get to ask him about Taylor Swift, but she's been able to make so many songs about heartbreak, and she gets criticized because of that. But it's inspiration for writing songs. I just think writing music in general is freaking impossible.
Beyonce Lemonade. I mean, how many times is your husband going to cheat on you, and then you get in a fight in the elevator at the Standard Hotel? Probably not that many.
So anyway, long story short of just like we both love music. I think, and he has like a unique look into that field of stuff that we don't necessarily know about. So it was exciting to talk to him for sure.
It's interesting because a lot of times as you were mentioning, pain causes the art, right? Like the art blossoms from pain, which kind of sucks. Like you have to go through something awful and traumatic, or something amazing and love. Like it's a big time feelings deal.
I remember listening to like certain albums. They were probably like John Mayer albums, and I'd be like, like I'm so upset. Like I wish I had my heart broken right now because I wish I could relate to these songs more. I remember thinking that growing up. How dumb is that? It's so weird.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever.
But like I wanted to feel like what this album felt like, or what this song, or the emotion in this song that I'm listening to. I'm like I couldn't relate to it, but I realized how emotional it was, and I wanted to have a connection to it. So I remember, in my teens, I'd be like, I don't know. I went through, we don't have to get into my like, dating history in high school, but I remember thinking that in the back of my mind, because you could tell like when someone is going through real shit, that's when they make their best art.
Yeah, but I can consume that and also not have to go through some real shit.
I don't know. I didn't have it all figured out, Michelle. Okay. I didn't have it all figured out.
Wow,
I'm glad I didn't. But yeah.
Steve, that's one of the more surprising things you've ever said.
I'll surprise you. Young Steve would surprise some people. I'm telling you. I always say it's a good thing Maddie didn't know me when I was young. It's a good thing you didn't know me when I was young. I was just a little bit of a different cat. But getting back into the music stuff, I have struggled. I don't think you are this way. Maybe a little bit, but not as much as me. I've struggled to find music that I love and attach myself to as much as I did when I was in my teens or even early 20s out of college. The last like 5 to 10 years, I've always considered myself a big music guy, but I've just struggled to find new artists and acts that I really latch onto. I don't know. Is that just like part of getting old?
No, you know what I think it is I think it's with a lot of other things in society that everything is on demand and where everything is oversaturated. Okay, so I watched the Blockbuster documentary over the weekend. Have you seen that on Netflix?
No, was it good?
It was
the irony, by the way, of Netflix making a Blockbuster documentary.
I know the whole thing. But when we were growing up, watching a movie was an event. You would go to the movie theater. It was an event. There was only X amount of movies out. They were only out for this amount of time. If you wanted to see it, you had to plan around it. Friday night, going to Blockbuster, the smell of the Blockbuster, searching for the movie, landing on one, hoping they had it in stock, getting the pizza, going home, watching the movie. It was an event. Now we have a buffet of content options. Speaking of burnout, we're burnt out on content. We have everything we could ever want. So movies are not an event. The same way music is not an event. When NSYNC or whoever you loved came out with a new song, you would have to wait to hear it on the radio. You would wait for the album to drop. And now we have new music Fridays on Spotify. We're getting new tunes all the time. So I just feel like everything is oversaturated anymore, and it's not as special as it used to be. That's why, I know I talk about Frank Ocean a lot and you talk about John Mayer, but those are artists that we have an emotional connection to that makes us feel things, and that's rare. But there are the Dua Lipas of the world that just put out bops.
Well, it's just a bop. There's just bop after bop.
I love consistent bops. But
that kind of music, it doesn't matter. I'm always.
You're not going
to
connect to it.
No, it just I put it on the car.
I felt levitating. My God, I felt levitating in my soul.
Yep.
You're never going to feel that. But yeah, slow dancing in a burning room, that's going to stick with you. The first time that I heard Siegfried by Frank Ocean, that sticks with you. You know, things like that. Yeah,
and it's a good point you bring up about movies too. I kind of feel like collectively the movies and the television shows now are so good that back in the day, you would watch a movie and it would be a bad movie and be like, yeah, that was okay. All right, we rented it at Blockbuster because there was so much more investment into it. Yeah. And now I get so in my head about what I'm going to pick on Netflix or what movie I'm going to watch that I'm in the IMDb looking up, reading reviews, because I'm like, I don't want to waste 2 hours of my time. God forbid I watch a bad movie. It would totally derail my day. I'm so in my head on this stuff now. And there's never been more great content than ever, but you're right. It's like it's brain overload. Like you can't process how much good shit is out there. And it's musically too. But I think some of it is just me getting old. At some point in life, I kind of feel like you become an old person and you just stop, you listen to all the music from the past. You don't really move forward. And I'm afraid that I've gotten to that point and I try actively not to. So,
are you kidding? We're there, kid. We're there. I get DMs, we get messages to our website. part of the people, there's a demographic of OG Shelleys that are our age, and they only like the pod because of the nostalgia factor.
I know.
Because we talk about things that we used to like, and we're seriously the get off my lawn people now. I'm like, I'm not getting on TikTok.
Man, don't say that.
There's too much content.
Well, I'm on
out
TikTok
there.
now, so don't worry about it.
I know.
Yeah,
but I'm clearly like becoming an old woman. But I just think you're right, though, by the way. Imagine when we were kids, you would rent a movie that likely sucks, that's likely trash, and you'd watch it with your friends while you're drinking Surge and eating Papa John's, and you're like, you know what? Paul Blart, not bad.
I remember I went to the movies in middle school to watch on a date to watch a movie called Darkness Falls, which was one of the worst movies probably ever made. It was a horror movie, absolutely terrible. Well, I guess my parents probably gave me money at that point, but I literally went there and that was like my entertainment for the night. And now I'm like sitting here looking at IMDb going, 6.9. I'm not sure that's good enough for me. It's insane how we've just changed. It just, I don't know, blows my mind.
And in such a short period of time, so many things have changed in such a short period of time. It's not like a decade of evolution. It's like, well, maybe it is, and we're just old as hell. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, let's wrap this up. This was great. Thank you to Jason Fitz again for giving us the time, and we'll definitely have to have him on again because, as you mentioned, we didn't even ask him any Taylor Swift questions that we had, and he'll obviously be a great resource there. But we're going to get him on again soon. But please follow him at Jason Fitz and be sure to check out the draft stuff he talked about. I cannot wait to see the Music Hall of Fame NFL crossover stuff. It's going to be outstanding. Thank you to everyone for listening. Thank you, Cerruti. Steve and I will be back in action next week. But until then, F the Super League.
We're all Pop-Tarts.
Thanks for listening to Small Talk. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or the Podcast One app.